You're tuned in to The Last Radio Show.
Hello and welcome to The Last Radio Show. I'm John Lynch.
I'm Jenn Reilly.
Now, we like to talk about lots of different stuff here on this show. We talk about history, we talk about people, we talk about music, and we're going to talk about a music person. Now, remember a couple episodes ago we talked about the Beach Boys?
Yes.
Now, we were talking about Brian Wilson and how he kind of had some issues with some drug abuse and some substances and all that kind of stuff. And we mentioned Ozzy Osbourne.
Right.
And we were both like, we should do an episode about Ozzy Osbourne. Well,
I think because, the Beach Boys were controversial. That was where that came from.
Yeah, because they were so controversial. So we're picking it up a notch, and we're going to talk about Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
Now, as he was born John Michael Osbourne,
Okay, I didn't know that.
Which does not have quite the same bite as Ozzy.
I wonder where he got the Ozzy from.
I guess it's just short for Osbourne, I guess.
Right.
I don't know. But, it's kind of weird that his nickname is like a play on his last name. Usually it's his first name, but it works. It's, it's got a nice alliteration to it. Ozzy Osbourne. It kind of rolls off the tongue. So he was born in merry old England, as you might have guessed by his accent. That's not really a big shock, I think. If you've ever heard Ozzy talk, you know where he's from. He was kind of working class, very, not a rich family by any means. In his childhood, and right after he graduated from high school, he was arrested, went to jail, and for some petty larceny crimes. And his dad wouldn't pay his bail, so he had to stay in jail for 3 months because he thought this would teach him a lesson, which is tough love. You got to give it up to his dad for that.
Well, he showed his dad.
He showed him, definitely, So early on, he had kind of a little bit of a troubled youth, I guess you could say.
Right.
And like a lot of people in the 60s who were growing up in that era, he decided to form a rock band. And he, in 1969, joined the band Black Sabbath. He's one of the founding members of Black Sabbath.
Right.
Kind of, I guess, the forerunners of heavy metal. They were like really probably the first true heavy metal band. Kind of invented the genre, or, Paranoid, Iron Man, the classic songs, and just the name of the band.
Right.
I mean, Black Sabbath. I mean, that kind of just shows you what they're all about right off the bat.
Right off the bat, they were this heavy metal, like dark.
Yeah, they were definitely heavy. They called it at that time. They called it kind of acid rock and stuff. It was just it was a heavier stuff than than what like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the other '60s acts were doing.
Right.
It was kind of another, even more than like Led Zeppelin, who was a very heavy band too, obviously.
Right
around that same time. But they were kind of even heavier than Zeppelin.
Oh yeah, I was so afraid of Ozzy Osbourne when I was a kid.
I think everybody was when they were a kid.
Like seeing him on TV, I have to shut it off. I was so scared.
He definitely, he presented that aura. He was definitely, has this something about him that, he seems like a very nice person when you hear him talk, but there's like kind of like an evilness or a scariness about him. Like he's got like the eyes,
Well, I think what happened was I was afraid of him as a child, and then his show came on where he was like this lovable little like man. And I was like, oh,
what was I afraid of all those years?
This guy come from? Yeah, he was like shuffling around in his slippers, like heating up mac and cheese. You're like, wow.
His career definitely had two very distinct phases. It had many phases, but there was definitely, the music part of his career, which was where obviously he became famous and well known to begin with. And then when he did the Osbournes in the late 90s, early 2000s, he kind of shifted and became not quite a caricature of himself, but definitely he became more of a brand and kind of more of, kind of a little silly and doofy, whereas he was kind of dark and scary before.
Right. Like, so before you imagine him like emerging from a coffin and performing and then going back and that's it.
Exactly.
And you're like, wow, where did this guy come from? He's got like an alter ego.
I do think that kind of takes away a little bit from what he did musically, because, people do kind of look at him more like he was on the Osbournes.
Right.
But he was an incredible, Black Sabbath was this monumental band in rock and roll history, kind of discovered a whole genre of music. He was with Black Sabbath for their first 4 albums. They threw him out of the band because his drinking and drug use got out of hand. And then he started a solo career, which was massively successful. He sold over, between his solo work and Black Sabbath, he sold over 100 million albums.
Wow.
He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as part of Black Sabbath and as a solo artist. So he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Definitely a legitimate all-time great rock and roll guy, you know? But a lot of people just think, Sharon, I can't find my slippers, Sharon. Oh, and him, like you said, shuffling around in the kitchen, making mac and cheese.
Yeah.
So, but there was, growing up, when I'm a little bit older than you, not much, but a little bit. Right. In the 80s, I saw Ozzy in concert about 86.
Oh, so you were a fan? You were a fan? Or?
Oh, yeah. I liked Ozzy a lot. And it wasn't a hardcore heavy metal guy, but I was like, oh, you got to see Ozzy. I mean, come on, he's like the guy. And so I went to see him in 86, and it was an experience. I mean, It was definitely a lot of headbanging, a lot of people really kind of into the show. And there was, again, we've talked about this before, how, the pre-internet days, there were these urban legends that were floating around, not like now you can just kind of Google things and check them out, but there were these stories that went around about people, and you kind of heard it from friends on the schoolyard or whatever.
Right.
And Ozzy had a lot of stories about him. And it turns out a lot of them were kind of true and pretty much true.
I mean, the bat story, is that true?
The bat story is true, and there's a bunch of stuff like that. There's definitely a lot of animal cruelty in his life, and it's a little disturbing. And I think the biggest thing that I remember around the time that I got interested in him was that there were a lot of people who thought he was a devil worshiper, and he was trying to he was the satanic panic that was going on in like the mid 80s. He was right at the forefront of that. And when they were talking about labeling rock and roll records with warning labels, a lot of that was because of him. And he was sued by some parents who had some kids who did some bad stuff, committed suicide and stuff. Said that it was because they heard things in his lyrics that told them to do this stuff.
Oh, wow.
And it's definitely the parents were probably projecting some things onto Ozzy Osbourne that maybe they should have been looking at themselves, and what job they were doing raising their kids. But so I'm going to go through a couple of the myths. We're going to talk first about his music side, and then we'll get into the wackier side.
That my favorite.
So Black Sabbath, like I said, he was the founding member, the original all four members of Black Sabbath at the time of recording are still alive too, which is amazing.
Really?
Considering the rock and roll lifestyle they've led. And
that's where I do kind of believe the deal with the devil type of thing, because it's like so many people are dead. Like,
But but there have been a million people in Black Sabbath since. They've changed the lineup a bunch of times, but the original four founding members, of which Ozzy was one, all four of them are still around. Tony Iommi, the guitarist, he's kind of the other famous member of the band. But they have many singers after him, and the bunch of lineup changes throughout the years. But the original four members did the first four albums, and in '79, the drugs and alcohol got to be too much for all of them, not just Ozzy.
Right.
But Ozzy was the worst case scenario. Now, they had this guy who was managing the band, and he was the one who threw Ozzy out of the band. Now, the guy who was managing the band had a daughter whose name was Sharon.
Oh.
Yes. So their manager's daughter kind of took Ozzy's side when they broke up, and she started dating Ozzy.
This explains a lot, by the way. I did not know that about the whole relationship and Sharon's whole.
There's a lot to psychoanalyze here. There's daddy issues galore and all this kind of stuff going on. Now, the problem was when Sharon started dating Ozzy, Ozzy did have a wife at the time. So that was a little bit, and a couple of kids too. So he had a first wife that he was married to for a few years, that they had a couple of kids together, and they actually adopted a couple of kids as well. So, I mean, he had a whole family that he kind of left for Sharon at this point. So 71, he married Thelma Reilly. That was his first wife's name.
Okay.
And, again, there were issues in the marriage because, he was living the rock and roll lifestyle and was not particularly faithful, and, obviously had the drug problems, was on the road all the time, a lot of the classic rock and roll tropes, which he maybe invented some of these tropes. They kind of started, with him. So when he left Black Sabbath, they had to put together a group of, a band for him to tour with as a solo artist. So he needed new musicians to work with.
Right.
And that's what Sharon became his manager and his
that's
girlfriend. And she recruited musicians to tour with Ozzy. And at first, a lot of people are like, this guy's, nuts. Why would, anybody want to work with him? Record labels were very hesitant to sign him. And so but they put together a band. They put out an album. It was very successful. They put out another album. It was really successful. Crazy Train, which is kind of like one of those anthems, was on the first album. And the guitarist in the band was a guy named Randy Rhoads, who is in the rock and roll, especially in heavy metal circles, he's one of the legendary guitarists.
Okay.
He's kind of like at Eddie Van Halen's level.
Okay.
Considered like a virtuoso on the guitar, and was kind of like the co-headliner with Ozzy almost, because he was that good,
Okay. But it was a solo. What did the band have a name or no?
No, it was just Ozzy Osbourne and his band, right. Yeah. And so they were, doing records and touring. Now they were on tour, and in '82, promoting their second album, Diary of a Madman, and which had the song Mr. Crowley, which gets into the whole satanic thing too, because he's talking about Aleister Crowley, who is a satanic high priest. And
okay.
So, yeah, he wrote the Satanic Bible. So right. he plays into the whole devil thing, a little bit.
So this is why at 6 I was pretty scared.
Yeah. Right. So in '82 they were on tour, and the tour bus driver was also a pilot, and they rented a plane, like they had an off day. And they went on a plane ride. The tour bus driver and Randy Rhoads went flying around on this little plane, and they decided to buzz the bus, like kind of like fly low over the bus.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah, you can see where this is going. And they were kind of like pulling a prank on everybody else in the band, kind of thing, by like kind of like waking them up, because it was like they were probably all sleeping or whatever.
Right.
The plane crashed, and Randy Rhoads died.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and the tour bus driver died, and another person was in the plane. So that was, kind of, was a black mark in, the history of his solo career.
Yeah. Oh,
and again, Randy Rhoads was, and Ozzy went into a big depression after this, because they were very good friends too, because they worked together for a few years at that point.
Right.
And so that was that kind of, he kind of had to reset his solo career again.
Oh, man.
So, he was kind of, he made a lot of comebacks in this part of his life,
And I think that Sharon has a big part. Like, they always tout her. She's the woman behind the man, really.
She is a very savvy businesswoman, and I've known a couple of people who have met her and dealt with her on a business level, and they do not speak highly of her on a personal level.
Really?
Yeah, very difficult to work with, and very difficult, but she gets what she wants.
Right.
So, very good for Ozzy, and
she had to steer that crazy train for a while. So
so here are some of the things that kind of the wacky side of some of Ozzy's stuff. So when he was growing up, before he was a rock star, he worked at a slaughterhouse. He actually that was his growing up, his job. So
so that makes sense.
There's definitely some issues with animals now.
Right.
At one point, when he was with his first wife, they had a wild cat problem. Like they lived like on a farm, and there were a lot of feral cats around, and they kept like jumping on the cars that they had and scratching them up and stuff like that.
Okay.
So Ozzy one night, very drunk and very stoned, set a barn on fire that the cats were in, and started shooting at cats with a shotgun.
I do remember that story. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Pretty dark.
Yes.
So his wife had the idea to kind of calm him down, to maybe give him some therapy. She decided, you know what, we're on a farm. You should do some farm things. Let's get some chickens and raise some chickens. The chickens annoyed him when he was drunk. And he shot and put them on fire too. So he's got definitely some animal issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a little dark, and thankfully that seems to be in the past at this point.
He must have been on some Quaaludes when he was doing the later show.
He was doing a lot of stuff. So this became known, though, that all this stuff with animals. So at his concerts, fans would throw animal parts onto stage.
Oh, the concert you were at too?
No, not the one I was at. That had kind of this was more like in the early '80s. I saw more in the later '80s. So
thank goodness.
I did not see that at the concert I was at, luckily. And that's where the story with the bat comes in. because someone threw a bat on stage, and Ozzy, claims that he thought it was a rubber bat, like a Halloween decoration kind of thing.
Okay.
So he took it and took a bite out of it and threw it back on, but he realized it was not, when he bit it, that it was
a real bat.
It was a real bat. It was dead already, but he bit the head off a bat. Some people say it was a live bat, but apparently it was dead already.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But because it just would have flown away when they threw it. But he did have to get like a series of rabies shots because
for sure.
Because it was a wild animal and nobody knew what happened. Now there's also another animal incident, and it's weird that there's numerous ones of him biting the heads off things, but he also bit the head off a dove.
Oh my God.
And this is extremely, extremely weird. They were having a meeting with the record executives of his record label, CBS Records, I believe it was. So they were in like this boardroom with the people who ran the record company, and they were like getting ready to sign his new contract. And Sharon, every time I say Sharon, I want to go, Sharon.
Yeah. But, I do notice a little bit of an English accent when you say it also.
You got to put a little zing on it. Sharon. Decided it was like she was going to make this statement and she was going to release doves as they signed the contract, kind of like some people do at a wedding.
Yeah.
They were in a conference room, so I don't quite know what she was going for with that. She probably had some issues too, in terms of, substance abuse or whatever, and maybe didn't always think as clear as she could. And Ozzy, who was very drunk and very stoned at the time, one of the doves landed on his leg and he took it off and he bit off the head of it.
Live dove, just like
live dove, in front of like the people who were signing a multi-million-dollar contract.
Now, did they think that was like a positive? I wonder if that was like, hey, this guy's gonna sell.
It gave them pause, but they signed him anyway.
Okay.
So some of the other things that he did, there's the animal stuff and there's also the urinating stuff. He has a habit of urinating in public a lot.
Okay.
And in some very unusual and strange places. Apparently one time he was at a dinner party, got up on the table, stripped naked and urinated on the host.
Oh.
Which is impolite. I mean, I think we can all agree that that's a bit much. You want to carry yourself with a little bit of sophistication. Oh. One time he was in Texas on tour and he snuck out because there are many stories of Sharon locking him in his hotel room so he wouldn't get too drunk, so he could do the show the next day.
Right.
Ozzy sneaking out. And so one night Sharon took all his clothes and hid them and locked him in the hotel room they were in. So Ozzy,
she thought that would deter him?
She thought that would deter him. So Ozzy took one of her dresses, put that on, went out, got some liquor, and got drunk. And he had to go to the bathroom, so he urinated. Now, he was in Texas. He was in by the Alamo. He was urinating on the side of the Alamo. Remember the Alamo? We all got to remember the Alamo.
Right.
And so the police found this drunk guy in a dress urinating on the side of the Alamo.
Oh, my goodness.
And that did not go as well as you would hope for him.
Luckily, I had a dress on, honestly.
That's up from when he was naked on the table. So, a lot of these things contributed to a lot of the legend of Ozzy. And, but what's funny is a lot of these stories you hear about rock stars, a lot of them, are definitely exaggerated. His seem to be downplayed.
Yes, right.
I love whenever you see him with interviews. If you ever saw, like back in the day, the behind the music they did about Ozzy Osbourne, which kind of I think led to the Osbournes because it was very popular.
Right.
He just explains things so matter of factly.
Right.
He's like, I had to go to the bathroom. There's this old building. I didn't know it was the bloody Alamo.
Right.
The police come, they arrest me. They're like, "What are you doing? Go to the bathroom on the Alamo." I didn't even know what the Alamo was. And it's just like, it's just like you if you explained a parking ticket to a friend of yours.
That is true. I think that's how he got away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he is very charming in a weird, bizarre kind of way.
Yeah, and they must have realized like that story right there. You're like, put this man on television, give him a reality show.
Yeah, exactly. So he was at the height of the reality show. He was invited to the White House for the White House Correspondent Dinner. This was when George W. Bush was president.
Okay.
And so he went there and got drunk and started yelling and screaming at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Ah.
And George Bush was heard saying, like, this may not have been the best idea. And he had to be escorted out of the White House.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
I mean, it doesn't, he's definitely operating on a level that, is kind of out of sync with everybody else.
Right. Well, can you imagine being his children at that point? I mean, his second set of kids, or his kids with Sharon, were born in the
Right.
80s, right? So
Right.
that's not that. It's not like he didn't chill out by then. Like
No. The second family didn't have a better time than the first.
Yeah.
Family,
But they all seemed very relaxed in that Osbourne show. Like nobody seemed fazed by anything.
They did. I mean, I guess if you're born into it, and that's just life to them.
Right.
So like I mentioned, they VH1 did Behind the Music, and they did a documentary on Ozzy Osbourne. He told a lot of these stories, and again, did it in a very charming, matter-of-factory kind of way. Again, like just like explaining like that he went the wrong way down a one-way street or something, as opposed to doing all this stuff. And so it was really popular, did really well in the ratings. So MTV started developing the Osbournes.
Right.
Now, this was a phenomenon at that time. This was like one of the biggest shows on television.
Yeah, I remember. I watched it all the time. It was a great show.
Yeah, it really caught on. Again, he was, a lot of the heavy metal music, was kind of underground and not really mainstream music, not like big pop hits kind of thing. But this really propelled him into the mainstream.
Yes, for sure.
That's definitely where he was, the younger rock stars kind of did look at him as like kind of like the godfather of heavy metal.
Right.
But, there was also this thing like, well, he's also kind of selling out a little bit and, maybe kind of just being a little bit of a buffoon here too.
Right. But how old was he now when he did the Osbournes? Because he had to be...
He was probably in his 60s, I guess, at that point, And, it's
maybe
just
even late 50s, maybe
late 50s, early 60s, probably.
Yeah.
I think he's in his mid 70s to late 70s now. So that's probably about right. Yeah. And so, but he's also, but this like brought his popularity to like another level.
Oh, for sure.
And he still put out music, and he still, he had more commercial success than he ever did before.
And people like me who were afraid of him when I was a little girl was like, oh, this guy's awesome.
Right.
He just,
and he's got a great voice. I mean, he's got a very beautiful voice, which sounds weird to say about Ozzy Osbourne, but it's a very, he really definitely, he can sing. I mean, he's a legitimate singer. He's not just screaming, he can literally sing. So it's so amazing that he kind of took this journey from this crazy guy who was, urinating on buildings, like again, being kind of like the family man in kind of a nutty sitcom.
But what's so funny is he found his niche. Like Mick Jagger just continued to play rock and roll, right? Like that was his thing. He didn't disappear. He just continued, Right. And then some guys disappeared. Some guys, died, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Ozzy found this niche. Yeah. Like he found his next reincarnation almost of, being a popular, like almost like an icon.
Yeah, and he cleaned up his act, and then he fell off the wagon. And then he cleaned up his act, and he fell off the wagon.
But he was sober for a bunch of years, right?
He was sober for a while, but then he's definitely, it's been an on and off kind of thing, definitely with him. And he's had a lot of health issues in recent years. So he did reunite with Black Sabbath a couple of times and tour with them, which was cool because it was the original lineup back together for the first time, in decades. And, they toured. And in 2017, I believe it was, he did a farewell tour. And, this is it, the last tour with Black Sabbath. Then he did a last tour that is as a solo artist.
Right.
He's probably going to be doing some more shows now. It's come out recently.
Sure.
That's the one thing about farewell tours in rock and roll. They don't always stick, know.
And they're really big sellers. They sell out.
They are really big sellers. So apparently this summer in 2025, he is going to take part in a festival in England that he's going to appear with Black Sabbath and also as it's a multi-day festival thing.
Really?
So he's going to do a solo concert and a concert with, and they say that's going to be it because he's not in the greatest of health right now.
I think he has Parkinson's, I read.
Parkinson's disease.
Yeah. And then he has some other issues with his back.
Yeah, his back is very bad from
right.
He can't really walk around, and he never was like jumping around on stage, but he was always moving. You know, he always kind of had this weird kind of thing if you see footage of him in concert, especially in his heyday, he just kind of like walked and back and forth on the stage, wasn't really dancing or doing anything. He just kind of walked over to the left and walked over to the right. He was always walking kind of like a hurried kind of walk, a weird kind of shuffle kind of thing he did. And it was just interesting because, and then, every now and then he'd raise his hands up, and that was about it. That was about as theatrical as he got.
That's it. He didn't do any dancing.
Yeah. It's like you mentioned Mick Jagger, who's like strutting around all the time, even in his 80s now, he's still doing it. But Ozzy was never really that. He was kind of like always very kind of like focused when he was singing. So he was definitely an interesting character. But it is funny how you say, like, as a little kid, you were scared of him.
Right.
And he was the boogeyman at one point.
He really was, especially as a little girl. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, again, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. And again, hearing these stories about him that you weren't sure if they were true or not, about all this wacky stuff that he did, it definitely, gave him this aura, the Prince of Darkness.
There seems to be a new documentary out, so we're going to have to watch that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to check that out.
And see what's true and what's not.
It's the mystery of Ozzy. So I'm glad you're not scared of him anymore.
No, I want to invite him to dinner. That's the turnaround that I've made with this man.
I would be careful at dinner because, he's at dinner. Sometimes he can get a little out of control. Don't, whatever you do, don't serve any birds.
We'll have dinner in the bathroom also.
That's probably the safe thing to do. Thank you for listening to The Last Radio Show. Check us out on Facebook at The Last Radio Show.
The Last Radio Show.
The Last Radio Show.